Hello and welcome to the Psychic Stories podcast, encouraging conversations about mental health. Today I'm speaking to Rachel Strivelli. Rachel is a writer and an intuitive coach, helping people to address feelings of guilt, imposter syndrome, and inner criticism. Rachel, hello, how are you?
Great. How are you, Matt?
Very well. I hear we are calling in from the plains of South Carolina.
Yes.
It's a place I've never been. However, the association with barbecue makes me want to visit every year. And the fact is, we're not going to be able to visit due to COVID at the moment, which makes me very sad.
No. Well, maybe I can send you some barbecue recipes. Although I don't actually cook barbecue myself, but I'll find the best restaurants, their recipes, and send them to you.
Thank you. So Rachel, the goal of today is to have an open and honest conversation about your mental health journey, to get some insight into the tools and tips that helped you along your way. And by discussing your journey, we hope to share and normalize these conversations about mental health, as often people aren't alone in these experiences. And I think the topic today, we're going to talk about, there are a lot of people who do struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'm so glad you do what you do with this podcast, because even I've been a guest on podcasts before, but I haven't really talked about my mental health journey. And so there's even a little part of me that thinks, oh my gosh, you're going to talk about this. But I know consciously and even emotionally, it's really important. It's okay for me to share this, and that my experience, even though it's really specific to me, someone else might have a similar thing. And that has always made me feel better when I'm going through things, is thinking, oh, it's not just me feeling overwhelmed and anxious and sad and all the other things. Like there are other people dealing with life and our mental health in the various ways.
And that's it. And it's dealing with similar challenges, like obviously not the same, the same feelings, experiences, but a lot of the challenges we have during life are similar. And hearing about these stories and hearing about how people have experienced them, can bring comfort, I think. So, I would love, from your perspective, to hear about your mental health journey, please.
Sure. Well, thank you for asking. So, it actually started in my early teenage years. There were some life circumstances that probably could have made me lean towards anxiety and depression. But whether it was a combination of those and just how I am, I think for whatever reason, I have some biological inclination to some of these feelings as well. So in what would be middle school here in the US, I don't know if you call it middle school in the UK, somewhere around 10, 11, 12.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So in those formative years.
Yes. I started feeling, I don't think I would call it anxious, but I just started feeling low level down about life. And then, even though my life was still pretty good, I guess, or average good, I did start feeling like, does my life matter? Does anybody care about me? Why should I be here? And I wouldn't exactly say that I was suicidal, but it was definitely heading in that direction of, I didn't feel excited to be alive. And to coincide with this, and I only just made this connection in recent times. So over the past year or two, I've really been working on opening up my intuitive gifts, because when I was a child, I was really intuitive and even had some clairvoyance and things like that, but it started freaking me out. And I'm being totally honest here. Like, I know some of your listeners might be like, whoa, left turn, where are we going with this?
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's important to be honest and to listen to people's other experiences, even if they're different to our own.
Yes. So I was having this experience, and even though my family was accepting of it, because I was raised in a new age kind of woo-woo household, it was scary and freaky to me, and I didn't want to feel like a weirdo. And so I just shut that part of my life off. And I didn't, looking in hindsight, I don't know if that's why I started feeling more depressed, but they happened in the same time period, within a year or two. And then, and it kind of was just this low level depression for a number of years. And then when I was in my senior year of high school, my best friend killed himself. And so
So
that, I mean, it gives me chills thinking about it. That shook me awake, thinking these thoughts that I'm playing around with, like if I executed them, that's actually scary and horrific. Like I saw the fallout in our friend group and his parents and his brother, and it made me realize I never want to go there. I never want to do that. And I need to find a way to work with this depression and these feelings and thoughts, because I can't do that to my family or to myself. And so then once I got to college, I started going to a counselor. First, occasionally a school counselor, but then as I was earning money with various jobs, I just realized I needed a counselor, because at this point, I wasn't suicidal so much, but I was having panic attacks and I had a real high level of anxiety. Yeah. And to me, it was scary that I could be hanging out with friends, having a good time, and all of a sudden a panic attack would start. Yeah. Or later, I was a classroom teacher and I would be in front of my class and then I'm having a panic attack and I'm thinking, but I need to be teaching, and inside it's like everything is falling apart and I just want to freak out and run out of the room. And so going to a counselor and taking a lot of time to look at my life and look at the triggers and all of that really helped. And should I kind of keep on going and give like the next part of my story, or tell a little bit about what I did?
I think I'd love to hear about that experience, because, you know, one, it takes a lot of courage, you know, to say, actually, I need to, I'm reaching out for help, you know, like you said, to a counselor, but also at the same time, like you're reaching that point where you're saying to yourself that something really needs to change. And it'd be interesting to know, was that decision to go and speak to someone, was that an easy decision for you because you were almost desperate?
Right. You know, I feel like it was easy. I'm sorry if there are people listening who feel like it's hard, but I think I just always knew that a counselor, I'm not saying they're like the savior who could fix every single situation, but I just always knew that that's a field that can help this problem and help me. And if I go to them, then I'm doing something, I'm taking an action to do something about this.
Yeah. And that's empowering in itself, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the first counselor who I saw, who I don't remember her name now, she told me about this book called The Highly Sensitive Person's Workbook. And there have been other versions of that. And there are not just workbook, but you know, written books that you can read. And at that point, I didn't know about that concept. I had felt a little bit like I didn't fit in various ways. And people told me I was too sensitive and too emotional and this and this and that. But then when I read that book, I started thinking, wait a minute, there are other people like me. There's a whole workbook. And this counselor pretty quickly was saying, here's what I see about you and how we can start working with this. And so when I was in my early 20s, the thing that I don't even think she showed me this, but what I realized is if I was drinking too much coffee, or at that time I was also smoking tobacco cigarettes, if I was smoking cigarettes, my chances of having a panic attack were more likely. So for me, if I take in too many stimulants, apparently, I'm already a little bit high energy. So I get hyped up, and then something in me is just like, we're going berserk. Alarm, panic.
But actually, in that case as well, it's understanding, like you said, those internal mechanisms that might coax you upwards in terms of those anxiety levels, and by more kind of systemic changes kind of across your lifestyle, that can change things significantly. And it's interesting, I mean, the one you talk about, smoking, I mean, smoking is addictive in itself. It's very hard to give that up. But did connecting it to the fact that you really didn't want to have panic attacks, did that make stopping smoking easy?
It did make it a little bit easier. And also I still am a health conscious person. And so even though you know, sometimes in their college years, people will dabble with things. So
Yeah.
I was dabbling with tobacco,
Yeah,
but I knew it wasn't going to be a lifestyle choice.
yeah.
I wasn't Rachel the smoker. And so always knowing that made me, off and on, I smoked for almost 10 years actually, but I would sometimes quit for 2 years, and then I would get in a social group that was smoking again and pick it up again. But all in all, I knew, for me, it's a little bit like playing with fire. I mean, literally and figuratively, of the more I smoked, the more it would just incorporate or introduce the stimulant that for my body was not a good mix.
And making that connection, and someone externally, the counselor, making that connection that enabled you to make that lifestyle change, which I hope led to a reduction in panic.
Yes, it did. And so over the next few years, I saw a few different counselors and really felt that I got a hold of things. But then my husband and I, we weren't married at the time, but we moved to Canada and I went to grad school, and I went from kind of small town, rural living to big city, Vancouver, British Columbia.
Yeah.
For me, it's a big city. Yes, there are bigger cities.
It's a big change, right?
Yes. And I didn't know anyone, and it was so shocking. And I knew then, okay, I need to start going to a counselor again, because also the winters there, I think they're a little bit like the winters where you are. Lots of rainy, kind of dreary days. And I know that's another thing about my physiology. So over the years, I've learned more and more, okay, there are certain things that my body just can do and can't do. And in my younger days, I had a lot of judgment about that and just, why am I like this? But now I just think this is how I am. Everybody's different. And so, yes, I have a tendency towards seasonal affective disorder. I can tell as soon as fall starts coming on and shorter days of sunlight, my mood starts dropping, and I do things to help. So we lived in Vancouver, and I started going to a counselor and bringing a few other things into my my life that would help support me.
Like what? I'd be interested. I was interested to hear, because I think it's a really amazing thing to acknowledge, that you said you're affected by the seasons in terms of your mood, but actually, so you can be proactive, can't you? Think, right, season's about to change, and actually, in a good way, we are changing into a more positive season now. But go to the opposite end of the year, season's about to change. Okay, what do I need to get out of my toolkit to be able to survive the next 6 months, or to at least cope?
Yes. So 2 big things happen. One, I will say, even though I highly value counselors, as I've said, I had one in Vancouver who, in my opinion, she wasn't good for me. I don't know if she's good in general, but our first visit, I was talking to her about my troubles adapting to a new culture, city life, dark days, all this. And I was telling her, I just want a supportive community, or I really feed off of having friends. And she did not have good words to say back to me. It kind of felt like she felt that me needing people around me was a weakness. And I decided, I'm not going to go to this counselor. My purpose of going to a counselor is they make me feel better, not worse. And I'm bringing this up because if there are people who are listening to this and they think, oh, Rachel says going to a counselor is great, and then they go to one and it's not a good experience, there are a lot of options out there. And I really, really believe, find the person who feels like a good fit for you. Because I've probably seen maybe 10 or so counselors in my life, and I've had one negative experience, and it just made me see, it's my life. I need to find someone who's a good fit. There probably would be another person going to that woman that her saying the words she said, they'd be like, you're right. I'm going to go conquer the world. It didn't do that for me.
But I think that's really a really important lesson, and it's something we hear a lot when we talk on the podcast, and also to within our mental health community at Sidekick, that a counselling relationship or a talking relationship is like a relationship with a friend. Like, some people you click with, some people you don't, and it's okay if you don't click with it. I think the difficulty can be is that if you're in a very, very dark and very low place, and you've taken a big step in terms of
Yes.
motivation and energy to at least go and speak to someone. And if that
Right.
experience is negative, then you can very easily go back into your shell and say, okay, right, I'm never
Yes.
speaking to anyone again. So I think it's always, you know, you need to be mindful in that situation that keep on going. There will be someone out there for you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And I just have so much compassion for, like you're saying, the people who it is a harder step to go see someone. I don't know why for me it hasn't been that hard. But I like self-reflection. I like learning about myself. And maybe that's an invitation for listeners to say, well, what if instead of seeing it as, oh, I got to go do this thing, what if it's you're with yourself for your whole life, and there are things that you can find about yourself to love, I hope. And so even though you're meeting with a counselor, it's really a getting to know yourself process, I feel like, with another person helping you explore that in a safe and kind way. And I guess that's why I've always been interested in it or open to it, is it seems like they can help me. And when I come to it with openness, the changes that happen seem to happen really fast, because I realize, okay, there's something I'm doing or thinking or feeling that's kind of making friction and problems in my life. Let's see if somebody else can give some insight into that.
And it's an investment, isn't it? Like people, you know, you're not, especially if you're spending money on it. That's the other thing, right? If you're spending money on it, you've got, you know, there's no point in feeling resentful about the money you're spending when effectively what you're trying to do is to invest in your own kind of self development. And that's why it's important to find the right person. Once you do have that, you've got to turn up to every session, not like thinking it's school. You're not there to, I suppose in some ways you are there to learn about yourself, but the learning comes from that person kind of professionally guiding, you know, taking you on a journey and, you know, and bringing their expertise to your mind so that you can start to maybe make linkages, like you said, with smoking that you never really made before.
Yes, exactly. And I love what you said about an investment, because that's exactly how I think of it. And so I'm at the point, as I said, I've probably seen, I don't know, 10 different counselors in my life. And there are instances from almost every one where I think there was a session where they showed me this thing or illuminated this aspect of my life or gave me an idea that I still think about today and I still use today. And it's almost like reading a good book that just stays with you and it becomes a part of your life. And so I just think that part of it is really cool, because the rest of my life or your life or anyone else, once you get that cool thing that they tell you or this new way of looking at it, you have years ahead of you to use that perspective. And so, so we lived in Canada for 4 years, and then we moved back to the US, and I was feeling pretty good about, I hardly had anxiety anymore. Hadn't had depression in years because I had done all these various tools and sessions with counselors and all that. And then I had kids, and I feel like I should say dun, 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 because then it was like, oh, let's just throw a wrench in things.
Well, that's I mean, having kids, and, you know, people who listen to the podcast will know I have a little daughter. It's the biggest life-changing event that I've ever experienced. And, you know, I'm experiencing it from, you know, as my wife said, I'm, you know, in some respects, especially in the early days, especially during the pregnancy, I'm kind of like an observer, right? You know, whereas from your perspective as the mother, it's an enormous change, both mentally, physically. And this is where I think what we're going to chat about today as well, in particular around the kind of those low feelings around breastfeeding. And I'd be really interested to hear your experience around that.
Yes. So my oldest daughter is 7. She was born in 2013. And in the US at that point, I knew about postpartum depression and there was some awareness of it, but it wasn't like it is now. In the past 5 to 7 years, there's much more awareness and structure and support for it, which is really a good thing.
Yeah.
And so when she was born, pretty quickly after, I started feeling more anxious and down. And for a period of time, I thought that I had postpartum depression. But also the other like life experience to add to the mix is my mother, who I was close with, had just passed away too. So it's like a bunch to process all at once. And and I had been a full-time teacher, and then I was a full-time stay-at-home mom. So it was just like total life change. And so some of the time when I was struggling with things, I wasn't sure, am I struggling with feeling alone? I can't call my mom and ask her for advice. I don't have many mom friends yet because my friend group hadn't done that yet. And so I needed to make a new friend group. So I had, and again, this comes back for me of when I'm in a community, I feel better than when I'm just me going at it alone. And so all of these various different things going on. And then at some point, well, around 9 months, my daughter just stopped breastfeeding. She just refused. And I was kind of thinking, whoa, that's not what I thought was going to happen right now. But I couldn't seem to make her do it. So that's where we were. You know, you can't really negotiate much with a 9-month-old.
Yeah, it's something what I've led. Especially with regard feeding, they will do what they will do, and half the time it's not them making a choice. It's something within them that has this, that biologically is like, I'm no longer eating this way. I'm going to eat this way.
Exactly. Yeah. So she was done, and it was a little bit for me because I a little bit felt my identity was like, I'm a mom who breastfeeds and I'm so proud of myself. And yet then she stopped, and I was like, well, there's that. And within 3 days of her stopping, all of a sudden it felt like someone turned the sunshine on, and my life just got brighter and got better. And this is also how I feel almost every springtime, of like, all of a sudden I feel like, throw open the doors, everybody starts singing. Like, it's like my mood goes from okay to exuberant super fast. And no one else that I knew had experienced that when they stopped breastfeeding, they felt better. In fact, I had kept on hearing the opposite. So many people I knew personally or online, reading blogs or forums or Facebook groups or whatever, moms would say, oh, I'm so sad, this stage is over, and the hormone levels dropping and all this. Less oxytocin, I think, is one of the hormones maybe that comes through that. And I thought, okay, this is interesting that I'm having this experience that's totally different than everyone else. But I was just loving it and loving life because I felt like myself again. And because I'm like to talk with people and share things that I notice, I've shared it with practically everyone I knew. And one of my friends who's in healthcare, about 6 months or a year later, sent me an article about D-MER, which is Dysmorphic milk ejection reflux, which is this syndrome or condition that breastfeeding creates some of the similar emotions and experiences of postpartum depression. And it's not all the same symptoms, but anxiety, depression, irritability, a hollow feeling in your stomach, racing feelings or thoughts. For me, there was also this feeling of wanting to run away, like that fight or flight adrenaline, like I gotta get out of here. And so I read that and I thought, okay, that's interesting. I wonder if that's what I experienced. And then a few years went by and I had my son, who's now 2.5. And prior to going into the birth, I talked with my midwives about, I think I might have a predisposition for either postpartum depression or D-MER. And we all need to know this because, you know, I wanted them on my team being informed so that we could all work together. And they, at this point, you know, everyone, it seems like, maybe not everyone, but most people who work in that birth, postpartum world know to look for postpartum depression and all that. And my midwives knew about D-MER, but not a lot of other people did that I came across. And what happened for me is 3 days. So for any woman who goes through pregnancy, somewhere 2 to 3 days after the baby's born, your hormones shift, and it's this huge drop. And I'm not in the healthcare field or a biologist or all that. Like, I know science, I have a science background, but I don't remember all the terms of every different hormone. But essentially, it's like the biggest hormone drop you have maybe in your life. So some things go from whatever level they're at, let's say 100% to 0 overnight, and then a whole new set of hormones comes in so that you can produce the breast milk for the baby. And so this happens usually day 3, but you know, humans are different. So a little bit of wiggle room there, but 3 days after the baby's born.
And just to put that in context, like you said, like 3 days after the baby's born, I mean, it's chaos.
It is.
But at the same time, you've lost your mum. Like, there's a lot going on, and I assume that actually that kind of that adjustment of hormones, like you said, and the fact that you said you kind of slipped into this feeling of no mood, was that what it was like? You just slipped into it. You didn't realize that actually you were feeling like this until the end, when you came out of it, and you think, oh my God, I feel better.
Yes. And so my second child, a little bit going into having him, I just felt like I wanted to have a good time with my baby. And I thought, I know that I may have this predisposition. I just want to be excited. I want to have a good postpartum time, because I really didn't with my first. And I didn't notice on day 3 with my first child, but with my second, it was similar to how I said when I stopped breastfeeding, it was like everything was great. Well, it was the opposite. And that it was the 3rd day, the middle of the night, I'm sitting outside. Everyone in my house is asleep. I know I could be asleep, but my adrenaline is racing so much, and my heart is racing, and I'm almost like rocking back and forth, because I'm thinking I've got so much energy in me and I'm feeling so anxious, but I don't know what to do. And one thing that made me feel really positive about myself was all of these years of doing my own mental health work with people and journaling, and all the things that I did made it so I felt the feelings that I feel when I'm feeling anxious and panicky and desperate and a little bit crazy, even though, you know, I know crazy is not a great term to use here. But I had the feelings, but I didn't have the thoughts that would normally accompany it, if that makes any sense. It was almost like there was a layer of objectivity in that I was feeling the things, and I was thinking, wow, this is how I used to feel when I might be judging myself or be anxious about going into this room where I don't know anyone, or all of the various things that would make me anxious. And I thought, but I'm not in a bad emotional place. The baby's healthy, I'm healthy, everyone's fine. But I thought this is the hormones charging through me. And then over the next 8 weeks or so, I wanted to breastfeed, so I was doing it. And I joined a support group online for D-MER. But interestingly, everyone else that I've talked to, either in that group or when I read about it online, for most people, they only have this experience when they're actually feeding the baby. What's called like your milk letdown, when the milk is coming out and your body's producing it.
In the actual physical act.
Yes, exactly. And for most people, it's a 2 or 3 minute thing, and then you're done. For me, those 2 or 3 minutes are like the worst moments of the day, but then the rest of the day wasn't better either. It was more like that was crank it up to 10, make you feel like you want to jump out of your body and run as far away as you can. Not that I know where I would run, but that's what the feeling is like. And if I was pumping and not feeding my baby, that was when it was even worse, because I couldn't be standing there, or holding him, sitting there, loving, looking at him.
Yeah.
It was just me and a machine. And I was like, ugh. And at my 8-week appointment with the midwives, they said to me, I don't know what you want to do or what we're going to do, but you're not handling this like we would like to see. And I was saying, but doesn't everybody, like, it's a little bit hard to know how difficult postpartum is supposed to be, quote unquote, you know, like how, what the range is of, I feel a little bit bad, I feel pretty bad, but I said to myself, well, these are professionals who work with women in postpartum every day. And they said that they felt like a decision needed to be made.
That must have been very difficult to hear as well, because I can only partly empathize in the experience for my wife as well. It's like, well, you've made a choice to breastfeed, and you can breastfeed as well.
Yes,
and
exactly.
When people say, actually, like you said, you're not handling it well, I can imagine there's quite raw emotions that come up there, and it's difficult. I think, I think what you said, earlier, especially with your second child, that kind of layer or level of objectivity may have helped. And I think perhaps, you were referring to that kind of layer of resilience that was built up because of the practice and the habits of the different mental health tools and tips that you've kind of brought into your own self along your journey. And that must have been very, very difficult to hear. But at the same time, it sounds like you were able to manage it from not an objective point of view, but from a standalone point of view, and not let the overarching raw emotions take hold, and just to basically come to a sensible decision.
Yes. And, I had been for a couple weeks dabbling in how much should I feed him? Like, we had started using some formula, and I had just kind of been experimenting in a way. How much can I handle? What if because I think at 8 weeks, I was feeding him 2 or 3 times a day, breast milk, and the rest of the time formula. And the thing about, also, I should say, I don't know if you've had a postpartum depression person on your podcast, but one thing that I'm sure relates to that is sleep. So I read that the first time, and I knew the second time, if anyone they found is getting less than 5 hours of sleep when you're in that postpartum place consistently, you're more likely to develop postpartum depression. And so I knew that from having researched it the first time. And so even though I was dealing with this other condition, I thought, well, let me do some of these other things to help. And so at least once a week, my husband would take over and do the night feeding. So I could get 5 hours in a row, not 5 hours total, 5 hours in a row is what matters. 5 hours consecutive.
Yes, and I can certainly tell through experience, it's those blocks of several hours which helps. And like you said, like, the fact is that is, from a guy's point of view, that is your role. Like, your role is, your role is to protect your baby, it's to protect mum. And if your baby does take formula, because I know some babies, ours didn't actually take formula, so makes me redundant. But from if the formula feeds are there, you guys have got to do them. That is what you're doing. So that you both have those 5 hour blocks, because like you said, if you don't have those 5 hour blocks, I mean, even people who have the most resilient mental health will really, really struggle.
Yes, exactly. And one thing that you just brought up made me think, that's why, in a way, so I made the decision sometime between 8 and 12 weeks to stop breastfeeding entirely, because I decided my mental health was more important, and my baby was going to survive no matter what I did. I mean, not no matter what, but he was going to eat.
Yeah. But also based on the experience of your previous child, where it's like, hold on, no, there are alternatives.
Yes. And so I was choosing to focus on a few of the positives, like, well, my husband gets to bond with the baby more, and these other things can be happening. I live in a modern world where I don't have to find a wet nurse. Like, there is stuff I can feed my baby, and I can care for myself. And also, with both postpartum periods, it was really about looking at my identity. Are my beliefs about holding on to this thing of I'm a breastfeeding mom, is that more important than my mental health? And I said, no, it wasn't. That's just an idea. And yes, I think it's great. And everyone who can do it in the ways that they can, I support them. But I also think your mental health is one of the most important things that you can have. And so for me, I said, my mental health is important and I don't care what anybody says to, try and convince me otherwise. But so when the midwives told me that, even though it was a little bit uncomfortable, I thought, I want to listen to these words of wisdom. And they didn't say, we want you to do this. They laid out the options for me. Yeah. And I had periodically, so when I had the crazy intense hormones come in on day 3, they had prescribed me a sleeping aid that was safe for breastfeeding, that was also an anti-anxiety aid. And before then, I had never had a positive experience with using medications to treat my mental health. But that was actually very helpful. I could sleep and I woke up with less anxiety, both from the effects of the pill and getting more sleep. And I didn't use it every day. I just used it when I felt like, okay, now I'm getting to a time where I have to get this sleep and it's really important. And so when I came to this time period of, I can decide what to do. I could go on medication all the time. I could keep on breastfeeding or this or that. For my own comfort level, I prefer to have less medication. So I opted to not do the breastfeeding. And then I could do other things so I take saffron and turmeric daily in a blend. And I really look at other things that I do in my life to help support my mental health and well-being. And it did allow me then, so after I stopped breastfeeding, again, I had that mood boost within a few days of, okay, now I'm back to myself again. And I don't have these hormones running through that make me feel irritable, always like I have to run away and really anxious about everything.
And I think as well, just to kind of like to not to summarize, but also to kind of really kind of go over those kind of lessons and what you would say to other people going through this experience, particularly other mums, right? Like, what would be those kind of the tools and tips that have helped you, and could it help other people at the same time? You mentioned quite a few. You've mentioned that kind of specific case medication, which we do hear quite a lot of. The medication in the right pill in the right time can be very, very influential. You mentioned journaling as well as your talking therapies. Like, what would you say to someone, to a young mum who's going through similar to what you're going through now?
Yeah, so I would say to remember the big picture of this, even though you're having to go through it in the moment, to zoom out and think, what is my ultimate goal for this time period? Is it, to breastfeed all the time, or to do this or to do that? Or what do I want to have as the overarching thing that I look back on? And if this new mom, like, I would hope that she could say, I'm going to honor and take care of myself. I'm going to take care of my baby, and, getting whatever help that is helpful. Some people love journaling. Some people don't. I really like it.
But the point is, like you said before, is find what works for you, right?
Yes. And that's one of the things, like, it's not always the fastest. I've shared essentially like 30 years worth of, here's my mental health journey over 30 years. And yet I feel really hopeful about it. When I look back, I think, look at all the things I did and tried and talked to and adapted. And, excuse me, another thing that I consistently do is I limit my exposure to certain types of social media or books or movies or whatever. Being that highly sensitive person,
it triggers. They're triggering effects.
It triggers. Yeah, movies can trigger panic attack in me sometimes.
So
there's
knowing those triggers are important.
Yes. And I really always go back to self-acceptance with myself. And like when I work with clients, I talk a lot about that, because it's easy to think, oh, I have this problem. It's just me. Why am I so weird? Why do I have this clunky problem that I have to fix and dragging myself through my life? And why can't I just be like XYZ, every quote unquote normal person? But I think there's so few normal people out there, really.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think like what you've covered, like you said, you've condensed your 30 years, of mental health journey really succinctly, and I can only thank you for being so honest and open. And we talked, just before we started, about openness as well. Thank you for being so open, especially around that the topic of breastfeeding and mental health, which personally, I think it needs to be talked about more, like, and having experiencing it from definitely an observer rather than subjective, but it's something that needs to be talked about more, and people need to understand that actually going through that process, it's not, there's a lot of ad campaigns which you must do this, you must do that, but actually it's a very complicated process and a lot of complicated emotions to process.
Exactly.
And if you don't have the kind of the people around you, or the ability yourself to kind of process those, then it can be a really difficult time, which when you're feeding your child is a really complicated situation.
Yes, I agree. And I think that's why each one of us needs to know who we are and what we need, and we can take and see what the ads say, what the experts say, and whoever else, what the friends, what our parents say. But at the end of the day, you have to live with your own choices. And what is the kindest choice you can make that's going to let you have a life that feels like you're caring for yourself in the best way that you can. I think that's one way to look at it.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, honestly, thank you so much for sharing your journey and on the specific topic of breastfeeding and mental health as well. And, I can only wish you well with your family at the moment.
Thank you so much.
Cool. And thank you to everyone listening. You can subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for Sidekick Community or Sidekick Stories and we'll pop up. Please do give us a rating if you like the show. And do check out our free Sidekick app for iPhone and iPad. We've talked about in our episode with Rachel today about tools like journaling, talking, and within that app enables you to build a personalized wellbeing toolkit of a variety of exercises. Basically, the point is find what works best for you. So whatever works best, try it, put it in your toolkit. And when those challenges come, may that be going through a very difficult time, parenting, of breastfeeding, childbirth, whatever it is, there are tools there which are free and available to you. So just go to our website, www.sidekick.org.uk, and click the download now button in the header to take you to the App Store. Rachel, thank you so much again.
Thank you.